webinar where we'll be able to review and continue to follow the different principles in the New Life in the 30-day challenge. And so we're going to be covering the principle of trust more and stress less. You know, for a lot of people, stress is not something that they really consider to be something to be managed in terms of their health. I think we intuitively know that stress is something that needs to be managed, but we are not always fully privy to the fact that stress is something that really needs to be managed in a very, very special way. And so for this one, I just want to take us through several of the principles of stress, what causes it, its understanding in terms of its impact upon the body, and our ability to manage that stress appropriately. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started and jump off. So if you have any problems, by the way, with any of the sound or the visuals, just let me know. And I can try to work with that. Sometimes we have technical difficulties. So first off, trust more, stress less is the first principle of the New Life. And this has to do with the fact that stress is so deeply correlated with so many aspects of health and ailments. But we want to pause a second and just sit back and think about the fact that what causes disease and sickness? What is this thing that's really driving these particular ailments that a lot of people are suffering? Well, first of all, the New Life, we really look at disease as in a more positive light, right? We consider disease as an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of what we call the laws of health, which are the 10 principles of the New Life. That whenever people are not living in harmony with these particular laws or principles of health, disease is an effort of nature to free itself, right? There's this particular call that something is wrong. It's an indicator. It's just like your check engine light that you would have in your car. Now, why is it that stress is so important? Well, you may be interested to know that 43% of adults actually suffer from medical ailments that are directly related to stress. And this is actually even broader when you think about the fact that 75% to 90% of doctor visits are actually stress-related ailments and conditions. Even further than this, right, stress is directly related to one of the most common things you can think of in any culture, of any person in life, is the existence of headaches. You know, a lot of people are fully aware that headaches are very pervasive and stress has a very strong correlation. The OSHA has essentially declared stress as a workplace hazard. And in fact, it's costing the employment industry $300 billion just because of the impacts of stress upon employees, their ability to be productive. And then lastly, all kinds of emotional and mental challenges and disorders are actually more likely to last, 50% more prevalent to be a lifelong ailment when stress is not managed and checked. So when we look at these statistics, we recognize that stress is something that's clearly very pervasive. There's a lot of problems that are surrounding this. And in fact, it is a major issue and a fundamental way of addressing our health concerns. Now, let's talk about what is stress really, right? Stress is the body's reaction to any change that requires adjustment or response, right? Whether that's picking up, weights, whether that's, moving, whether that's dealing with a response you weren't expecting. Stress is the body's reaction to any change that requires it to adjust or to respond. And so when you're thinking about stress in your life, think about these things that are causing you to adjust yourself physically, adjust yourself emotionally, adjust yourself, in terms of intellectually or even spiritually, and also requires you to respond, right? Something that's going to drive you to pray, or something that's going to drive you to want to meditate or take a walk or a breath of fresh air, or maybe that you have to deal with right away because it's an emergency. Now, what does stress do to the body? And we want to look at that very briefly, and we're going to have a series of videos where we show this particular elements through very short clips and animations to kind of drive this point home. So here's our first video.
Learning to better cope with stress will improve every area of your life and every part of your body. Stress affects everything within us. Look at what stress does. You know, stress is one of those things that oftentimes starts in the brain. Your hypothalamus signals your pituitary. The pituitary then signals something called your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands live above your kidneys, and they release something called epinephrine, as well as other stress hormones commonly thought of as adrenaline. Adrenaline then affects your liver because your liver wants to increase the amount of glucose in your system. What also happens with stress hormones is your heart beats faster. Your blood pressure goes up. Over time, increasing your risk for heart attacks, strokes, very dangerous things. But you know what? It doesn't just affect your cardiovascular system. It also increases inflammation throughout your body, including in your arteries. You know what? It even affects people's breathing, hyperventilation, and other things when you become too stressed. So, hey, what about your GI tract? People can have nausea, vomiting, stress ulcers. Mm-hmm. I know some people that when they get stressed, they actually develop constipation or diarrhea. Oh, yeah. So what you're looking at there is an animation of every single essential organ system in the body being affected by something called stress. And when 80% of Americans report feeling stress in their lives or being overstressed, this is a major problem.
And one of the things that you can't really show up there is fertility. Research has absolutely proven that stress affects fertility. So, and that's why a lot of people, when they go on vacation, all of a sudden they get pregnant.
There's definitely a difference between stress and anxiety. And the difference is stress is usually the result of a stressor. Like you said, finances. It could be marriage difficulties, work, anxiety to contrast with stress is when you remove a stressor and you're still feeling anxiety. That is what we call, in many cases, a pathologic condition. That needs help. Some level of stress in your life is what gets you off the couch. It gets you to work hard. So I want to say that short-term bursts of stress can be good for you.
Now, if you think about what we just heard in this video, right, about stress affecting every major organ and some of the other causes, right, we can also look at the fact that there's other principles in the new life that can also cause stress, right, depending on, alcohol consumption, drug abuse, poor dieting. Also, when we think about water dehydration, and we also think about poor food choices, all of these things can actually cause stress by violating some of these other principles in the New Life program. Now, unmanaged stress, right, it actually can lead to high blood pressure, it can lead to heart disease, and it can also lead to cancer, right? So these different lifestyle diseases actually are affected by stress that is unmanaged and that is persisting. Now, the question becomes, can we eliminate all stress? Is that true or false? And the answer is, it's false. You cannot eliminate all forms of stress. It's just not possible. Now, let's look at a video about stress.
In this morning's Health Watch, secret signs of stress. We all know about dry mouth and sweaty palms, but there are hidden signals your body sends out as well. And our Dr. Jennifer Ashton is here to help us decode them.
Good
stress,
morning, Harry.
Not good, right?
It can be. And that's really one of the big myths, is that stress is a normal physiologic response in our body and our brain to a stimulation. Okay. And people have heard of the fight or flight response in the body. That's usually with a threat, but any stress, whether it's a physical or emotional or psychological one, can produce a response. And for some people, that might be a positive or beneficial thing. It's not always negative.
All right. Let's talk about some of the different secret signs that you may not recognize, including cravings.
Yeah, cravings. Well, you know what? Desserts is stressed reversed. So think about that one. Stressed is desserts backwards.
I like it.
Okay, listen, people know when they crave comfort foods, and there's an unclear, probably complicated, intricate mechanism that goes on in the brain, probably has to do with some carbohydrates and serotonin, which is a feel-good neurochemical. Yeah. But listen, you want to keep it under control.
It's a little physiological response.
Exactly, Harry. A little chocolate, a little ice cream might make you feel better. A lot, not a good
Not such a good, and over the long term, skin problems. I've think we get that, right?
This is huge. You know, the skin is the largest organ in the body. So when you have a skin problem, especially if it's severe or chronic, it comes and goes, or it's really affecting a large part of the body, you want to look at an overall diffuse body process instead of, you know, looking at that one pimple and thinking just of your face. Right. We know that when you're stressed, your body can trigger the release of certain hormones. Right. They in turn can cause both inflammation and increase in oil buildup in your skin. And you want to realize that it's your body telling you, I'm stressed.
Time to chill. You get sores in your mouth sometimes?
Yeah, listen, this could be anything from psoriasis, eczema, acne, cold sores. Again, you want to really listen to your body. This is your body saying, this is an overall process, and I'm showing it to you in my largest organ.
I really believe this to be true, that stress exacerbates allergic reactions.
It is true. And again, not really clear why. There is some thinking that a certain protein involved in the allergic response can be triggered when your body is stressed. If you know you suffer from allergies and you find them particularly worse at a stressful time, you want to deal with the stress, not just the allergic
Here's
reaction.
Your big surprise, though. Weekend headaches. You're stressed all week, and then on the weekend?
Right. And people see this after big exams. They'll get a migraine after the event, after the test. So again, you want to, if you know that you're subject or prone to migraines or those kind of headaches, you want to take a little bit of extra TLC after the fact so that you can try to prevent it.
But then we have one here that says hair loss is a sign of stress.
What do you think about that, Harry? You never seem stressed to me.
No, never. Deep down inside. Dr. Jennifer Ashton, thank you so much.
A lot happens early on The Early Show. Weekday mornings on CBS.
Now, when we just looked at the idea that these are some of the secret signs of stress, right? Present in your skin. We looked at allergies, even hair loss, and a lot of people are not aware of this. Now, what does stress, when does stress actually become harmful, right? Because as we looked in the video, right, not all stress is bad. Well, stress becomes harmful when the intensity and the duration, right, of a stressor actually exceeds our capacity to react. So remember, stress is, right, something that causes us to adjust or to react, right? Now, or to respond. Now, when you're looking at good stress, right? Good stress does not exceed our capacity to react and respond, right? Let's say I'm driving and, I'm not really in a rush somewhere and I have a flat tire, right? I need to pull over and change my tire and get to where I'm going, right? But when you're saying, hey, I'm rushing to work and I have this big meeting that my boss is like, hey, listen, if you mess up this meeting, then pretty much you're done. You're going to get fired. At that point in time, right? Your stress now, the intensity of it, has exceeded your capacity to react. Or let's say, right, it's a job that you've been at for 5 years and the duration of that particular stress has exceeded your capacity to be able to react. And your body's going to start giving you those secret signs that we just looked at on your skin or, mouth sores in your mouth. It can be hair loss. It can be several different weekend headaches, as she mentioned, even migraines. And even myself, I've experienced migraines and I'm very aware of the triggers that lack of sleep can cause to me getting headaches like that. Now, if we look at the physiology and the psychology of stress, according to Dr. Walter Bradford Cannon, right, he's a professor of Harvard who coined the phrase fight or flight response, the effects of negative emotions, things like jealousy, hate, envy, bitterness, anger, and even the existence of danger actually create poisons, not just psychologically, because they do create them. Notice he says not only psychologically. So there's a psychological response to having these emotions, but actually physiologically in the blood. These powerful toxic substances weaken the body's functioning as a result. So it's very, very important to recognize that there is a physiological and a psychological response to jealousy, to hatred, to envy, bitterness, and anger. And it's important to recognize these elements are not just affecting you psychologically by these emotions that you're having. They're actually biologically, physiologically affecting the toxicity of your blood. Now, how can you tell if you're stressed, right? If you're experiencing things like muscle tension and pain, restlessness, fatigue, you're overeating or you're undereating, you have a lack of motivation or focus. Tobacco use is also another one, right? So you're thinking about chest pain, maybe depression, maybe a change in your sex drive in your marriage. even social withdrawal, sleep problems, an upset stomach. All of these particular things are, indicators, right? And this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, that can help you know, hey, you know what? I am dealing with stress on a chronic basis, and I need to start dealing with this and managing it. Now, as I go into this next video, this is going to show a little more of the chemical response of what's happening with stress, and even how this is directly related to those who may be struggling with diabetes because of what happens with blood sugars as a result of stress. So let's check this out.
When the body is under stress, the adrenal glands release a hormone called cortisol, also known as the stress hormone. Cortisol, in turn, causes stored sugar to be released into the bloodstream to provide more energy for the body to fight stress. Excess cortisol production is also known to make the body cells resistant to insulin.
Now, as you think about this element of cortisol, right, and I just pretty much cut that video short because we don't really need to get into all the nitty-gritty of the impacts that it has necessarily on diabetes. We do have a separate program that deals with that. But cortisol is a hormone that's released into the bloodstream when a person is stressed and can cause abdominal fat to accumulate. Right now, this is critical to recognize. There is a direct correlation between abdominal fat and stress and this hormone cortisol, which is released, when the body is experiencing stress. Now, this is important because when you release those sugars that are stored in the blood, right, this is increasing the blood sugars, and at the same time, it's reducing the insulin acceptance. So it's increasing insulin resistance at the same time. So there's more sugar in your blood, and it's not able to get into the cells through the insulin. And so these are some of the things that are actually related to these effects of what's happening with stress biologically in the body and practically how this is affecting your goals of weight loss. Now, what are the causes of stress, right? So we've looked at how do you know if you're stressed and some of the effects, but let's look at some of the causes of stress. First of all, one of the, did you know that your emotional intelligence, right, your ability to identify, assess, and to control your emotions in yourself plays a role in how well you manage stress. A lot of people are not able to identify how they feel exactly, or maybe they're not able to assess it. Maybe I'm feeling this way and I need to take a day off, or maybe they're not able to control their emotions, right? They're having outbursts of anger, as we looked at, as one of those signs that you're stressed. And so emotional intelligence is definitely a lack of it, or a poor management of our emotions is a major cause of stress. Also, overall outlook on life, right? And when we do the emotional intelligence series, we try to address this very element as well, and also in the stress challenges, to have people think about 3 positive thoughts, to write down things that they're thankful for. This is very, very important because your overall outlook on life, whether it's positive or negative, content or dissatisfied, can have a direct effect on your stress levels, right? When you become a person where I'm always looking for more, or I'm never content with what I have, your overall perspective on life is negative. This is going to lead you to have more stress. Now, while there's such a thing as positive stress, right, preparation and determination are required to actually bring out the best in every single person. Now, we put this here to let people know that a lack of preparation oftentimes can also lead to stress. And so this is huge, because when you're thinking about all the different elements that are involved in what causes stress, right? Think about your emotional intelligence, right? Your ability to adjust and react to the circumstances emotionally in your life, how you're feeling, how you're managing it, your overall look on life, and also how prepared you feel, in terms of dealing with the various things that are coming up in life. If you're constantly finding surprises in traumatic circumstances, you're going to be finding definite increases in stress. So now, what is the cure for stress, right? If this is the cause and these are the effects, what is the cure? Well, the key to managing stress is to look and focus on the positives in life. Live every day with gratitude for all that you have, right? This is one of the greatest greatest ways to dismantle stress in your life is to look at what you're grateful for. And I want to show you this video that really summarizes a lot of things that we just said as we kind of head toward the conclusion.
Stress is a part of life, and it's not always a bad part of life. Most of us enjoy good stress in small doses, like roller coasters, watching sports, or even a scary movie. That's the kind of stress that keeps us young and on our toes. Then there's bad stress, or worse, chronic stress. Negative stress isn't just in your head. It can affect us both mentally and physically. Stress hormones in the body for extended periods of time can physically age our cells. So when you're stressed at work or home, your cells look and act older, making you look older and even impacting your immune system. Not only does it add years to your appearance, it can also affect your memory, making brain cells shrink permanently. Even short-term stress can make it hard for you to remember simple things. The good news is, you can manage stress now to prevent more damage to your body and mind tomorrow. Stress management is a skill that can be learned. Check out Blue Casey's Tips to Manage Stress video for ways to beat stress for a longer, healthier, and happier life.
Now, as I go into this, this next video, I just want to talk about, as we look at some strategies of how we can address stress. This video really provides some great tips, and I want to kind of go from here as we kind of land this thing and really address some of those key strategies of how we deal with it.
Season can be a stressful time, but be careful. Studies show stress makes you age faster right down to your cells. Here with us to discuss stress and its effects on physical aging is Thea Singer, author of the book Stress Less. Thanks so much for joining us, Thea.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So tell us how stress is related to physical aging.
Okay. We've heard forever that stress can make us sick. It can contribute to cardiovascular disease, to dampened immune system, but new science is showing us that it can actually physically age us all the way down to our cells. I'm going to use my little shoelace prop here to explain that. In our cells, we have a nucleus. In the nucleus are our chromosomes. They're like two worms crossed at the middle. On our chromosomes lies our DNA, our genetic material, the very substance of our being. At the ends of our chromosomes are these little caps, just like the caps on the end of this shoelace. They're called telomeres. Just like these plastic tips on the shoelace keep the shoelace from fraying, the telomeres on the ends of our chromosomes keep our DNA safe. Now, every time a cell divides, the telomere gets a little bit shorter. And this is why scientists look at length of telomeres as a marker of biological aging.
Now does stress also make the telomeres shorter?
Well, this is where the really exciting revolutionary research came in. Alyssa Ethel at UCSF, she's a health psychologist, and Nobel Prize winner Elizabeth Blackburn did a study. They looked at these moms who were caregivers of chronically ill children, and which is an incredibly stressful situation to be under. They gave them a test. It's called the Perceived Stress Test, which is in my book, to see how they perceived their situations regarding stress. And what they found was the moms who perceived themselves as being under the most stress had telomeres that were shorter by the equivalent of 10 years than those who perceive themselves as being under the least stress.
That is fascinating. But what I want to point out and talk about next is that you talk about perceived stress. So does that mean that all stress is relative?
What that means is that there's really no such thing as objective stress. Think about it.
Right.
You know, you probably get less stressed out in front of this camera than I get stressed out. It all has to do with perceptions.
Right.
And while we can't change our circumstances, what we can change is the way we see the world. We can alter our perceptions.
Well, let me just throw something out hypothetically. I would imagine that being in a life or death situation is an objectively stressful situation.
Well, here's the thing about being in a life or death situation. That's called acute stress. Okay. That's actually a good kind of stress. Because what happens when you're in that life or death situation? You need to flee.
Right. Okay. Or you need to fight. And so your stress hormones rev up, your cardiovascular system, your heart beats, your brain gets more acute, you see better. So that's a good kind of stress. That lasts for just a short period of time. But again, you have to remember.
It revs up your system.
It revs up your system.
Go.
That's good. You're Juliet waiting in the wings. You're going to go on and see Romeo.
Adrenaline pumping.
Absolutely. As Bruce McEwen, who's a stress guru, and he's at the Rockefeller University, told me, without stress, we'd be dead.
Right.
We don't want to get rid of stress. What's bad is when it's chronic or when it's repeated.
So do we have some control then over our stress levels, how we perceive our stress? Are there exercises that we can do to eliminate some of the stress?
Absolutely. There are many things that we can do to essentially stress-proof our brains. Exercise, for instance, is a huge one. And this doesn't just mean when you're feeling stressed to go jump on that treadmill. If you are on that treadmill beforehand and for a certain period of time, aerobic exercise, the CDC recommends 150 minutes a week, you're actually stress-proofing your brain. You're making it hardier. So when you perceive a stressful situation, it doesn't seem to be as much of a threat. Instead, it can seem to be a challenge. There are other things that we can do. Social support is a huge way to reduce stress, and it actually changes your brain as well.
What about what we eat? Does that have an effect?
What we eat does have an effect. Now, there aren't a lot of absolute foods out there that reduce stress, although a study that was done at Penn State University shows that pistachio nuts, in moderation, can actually reduce our blood vessels' response to stressors.
And I'm guessing sleep is a big one.
Sleep is a huge one. Sleep deprivation is used as a torture technique because not getting enough sleep is so stressful.
So bottom line, since we're running out of time, have a few pistachio nuts, get a lot of sleep, meet with your girlfriends once a week, chat it out, and exercise.
Meditate a little or go for a mindful walk. Slow down how you're eating. It's not just what you eat, it's how you eat that can make a huge difference in what happens with your stress hormones.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating stuff. And for more information on stress and aging, check out Stress Less by Thea Singer.
Now, most people basically have three strategies of addressing stress, right? The first one is to minimize the stress. The second one is to manage the stress. And the third one is to maximize the stress. Now, I'm going to look at each of these individually to figure out what is the best strategy, right? First of all, let's look at minimizing stress. Minimizing stress is basically downplaying the importance of a real life event that needs your attention. You see, minimizing stress is basically saying, well, I'm just going to ignore it, right? This is kind of the equivalent of turning in a blank test, right? I'm so stressed out about this particular exam and this test that I am essentially going to just turn it in and forget the fact that, you know, I have to figure out the answers. I have to remember what's going on. And because of that, turning in the test and a blank test, yes, it deals with the stress in the immediate moment, but it does not address the realities, right? You're going to fail the exam. This is going to affect your grade. This is going to affect your ability to graduate on time. This is going to cost you more money. You're going to have to explain this to your parents. Whatever the case may be, right? It may seem to be a solution in the immediate moment, but in the long scheme and the grand scheme of things, it is not functioning at all. And this is not really the best strategy, but this is a strategy that many people use. They just try to ignore the issues in their marriage. They try to ignore the issues in their family. They try to ignore the issues in their business or at work, in their professional life, thinking that they can just minimize it by pretending like it does not exist and it is not there. Now, secondly, some people, they maximize the stress, right? This thing is just blown out of proportion. And this is essentially the tendency to make victims of individuals rather than enable them to be the active and decisive agents of their own lives. This is kind of a mindset of fate, right? It's just, this thing just happened to you. And there's no question that there are stressors that are outside of our control, right? That just came on their own, right? A natural disaster, as we're looking at Hurricane Maria, different Hurricane Harvey, looking at the earthquakes in Mexico, looking at typhoons, you know, in Asia, the fires that are going on in the West Coast of the United States. Each of these circumstances, right, are external stressors, but there's no question, right, that yes, these are stressful circumstances, but it doesn't mean there's no reason and no hope to be able to navigate these circumstances, just as we looked at in the video, right? Stress is important in situations of emergency, but at the same token, every stressful event is not a 8.7 earthquake on the Richter scale in our lives. Every stressor in our life is not a typhoon in Asia. It is not Hurricane Harvey bringing billions of dollars of decimation to the environment of our lives. But this is sometimes how people approach stress, and this is how they essentially address it. Now, the last one, which I feel is a lot more relevant, is to manage stress, right? This is really the individuals who manage stress. These are the heroes that we love to hear about, right? These are the ones who beat the odds. These are the ones that overcome obstacles. They succeed despite what's going on. They never let go of their dreams, right? They were tenacious about making it, whatever that was for them in their experience, right? They were the individuals who could manage stress and were able to allow the fact that, hey, you know what? I'm going to look at this as a stepping stone. I'm going to use this discouragement to be my encouragement. I'm going to use the fact that you're trying to, to fight exactly what I'm trying to do as an opportunity to pivot and to completely revamp everything that I'm trying to do. And this is an enormous skill to be able to develop, because when you're able to manage stress, as we've already learned in this presentation, the impact that it has on all the essential organs of the body, the stressors, the abdominal fat, all these particular elements, people will be shocked, right, just by the fact that by living by this principle of stressing less, right, by trusting, right? Now, a lot of people don't necessarily have to have faith. They don't necessarily have to have belief in a higher power, a higher order thinking and philosophy in the universe. But as we tell people in the New Life, you don't have to necessarily trust in anything such as, religious figures and things like that. Just trust in the laws of health, right? Trust in the fact that these things do work. The science proves, right, that managing stress can reduce all the symptoms that we've all discussed and the effects that we mentioned earlier in this presentation. I want to end with a story by a psychologist. This psychology professor, she was in her classroom and she was walking around her classroom with a glass of water in her hand. And as she was teaching and walking around, she raised the glass of water and she was about to ask a question. And a lot of the students in the class, they thought that as soon as she raised the glass, she was going to ask the question, is the glass half empty or is it half full? But that is not the question that she decided to ask. In fact, instead of asking that question, she said, how heavy is this glass of water? Right. And the answers came, in many different forms. Right. You had, some people say it was 8 ounces. Some people say it was 20 ounces. Right. Talking about how heavy is this glass of water? And she replied, the absolute weight does not matter. What does matter is how long I hold this glass of water. If I hold this glass of water raised for a minute, it's not a problem. If I hold it for an hour, I'll have an ache in my arm. If I hold it for a day, my arm will feel numb and paralyzed. In each case, the weight of the glass does not change. But the longer I hold it, the heavier it becomes. She continued and applied this to stress. The stresses and worries of life are like that glass of water. Think about them for a while and nothing happens. Think about them a bit longer and they begin to hurt. And if you think about them all day long, you'll feel paralyzed and incapable of doing anything. Her point was, when we're dealing with stress in our lives, we have to remember to put the glass down. That is the key to dealing with stress, is to trust and believe that I can just put the glass down. I don't have to think about this all day. I don't have to think about this for the rest of the time. We can trust more and stress less. Thank you guys for tuning in. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask before we conclude? You can feel free to submit those through the webinar software, and we can have those things addressed. This will be available on our YouTube channel for people to watch as soon as we're completed. And we'll be able to sign back on to the particular platform, and you can rewatch these videos. We offer them for free and continue to show them in our different sessions as we're constantly developing our research. So we thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again in the future. All right. Thanks so much.